else that I wanted to talk to you about that. It's I have a lot of people coming into the office with a variety of types of anxiety. I mean, there's only one anxiety, there's only one stress, but they relate to different issues in life because we live in a world which we have a variety of people. So some people, I have a lot of people coming into the office for nail biting or finger biting, okay, and so they have that because they have a certain amount of anxiety. Now, I can relate to a story that, for example, I had a guy that I had last week, a very young guy, very intelligent, very bright professional, that has an executive level. He works in executive as an executive with a certain company, and so he came here because he was worried about biting his fingers. And he bit his fingers. He's a young guy, very bright, but through conversation with Moses and through these dialogues that I do while we're dead, and we find out through stories, different stories. No, stories are related. Remember, when someone is talking to you and someone is relating to you a story, they're actually telling you about what they think and the perception that they have, either about what they're doing or about their lives in general. And so what they do is they recreate different stories based on the perception that they have been doing, that they're stuck about. So they're stuck about something. They're stuck about something that they think that they can't get away from. And they do this because they have the best intention. In other words, they do this because they have the intention of getting out of the problem, and the problem for them is the solution. So they get stuck in that solution by talking and talking over and over again, so they make a habit of talking about something important. In this particular case, this guy had to bite his fingers because at some point in his life, maybe going back into when he was 10 or 11 years old, I think he was 11 years old or so, he had an inconsistency of believing in himself, because he was kind of a shy person when he did what he used to do. He had an inconsistency of believing in himself. So because everything was provided for him, in other words, everything was resolved for him, every time he needed to make the effort. This is a guy that needed to make a little bit more effort than others because he had a vacuum in being consistent with himself and believing in himself. In other words, he had low self-esteem. Because he did all of that and something was provided for him all the time, he had a vacuum about making decisions because someone was doing it for him all the time. And he grew up having had a very comfortable family. He grew up in a very comfortable family, going to very comfortable schools and having a great education. Having had those circumstances, he never had to make an effort for himself. And because of that, he's now facing the world in a different way, in which he needs to be able to be responsible, to be able to make decisions that he could never do. So his way of making his decisions was to bite his fingers, to the extent that he really screwed his fingers so much that he used to use gloves in Florida, where you and I know that we're in New York or in Connecticut. We're in Florida, in which you don't have to use gloves. Okay, so he needed to use gloves in Florida in order to go to work because he bit his fingers so bad and so hard. As a result of the work that we have been doing in the office, and with these conversational predicates that I'm talking about, what I did was to be able to recreate stories for him based on his stories that he was telling me. In other words, when I sat down in front of him, which is what I do solidly, in many different ways, is that I recreate the stories by changing the time in which the story was made, or changing the verbs in which the story was made. In other words, I am using the same facts, but I am destroying the context behind the facts. And going back into them and making it seems that they're talking about something that they never understood, but changing the time of what they understood. I'm going into something that I will tell you more later on, that it's called conversational regression. which I go into regressive conversations by putting them in time specifically about what they understood once they felt better about changing the topic. In other words, if you were to be conversing with someone and you were to be changing the topic of what someone is telling you without them knowing what they're talking, what they're saying, then they would be believing in something that they thought they could never say. And so they themselves will be recreating the story and changing the emotions about what they could do. And because of that, you will be creating a vacuum, which in this case is what I do. I create vacuums in conversations in which gives them the chance to think about something that they could never do by relieving the anxiety of what they could never do. So within this conversation, they feel very comfortable, and the more I do it, in different ways in the office, the more he doesn't have to think that he has to need to bite his fingers in order not to get anxious. In other words, he doesn't need not to be, not to have, not to substitute his self-esteem by the biting of his fingers. In other words, what I do is that I create vacuums in the conversation by recreating the time, recreating the space, and also working with the identity of the person in order for the person to think otherwise about the same story that he's telling you. And so when they speak to you without sometimes even knowing, not knowing consciously, which I'll explain to you later on. I'm not talking about the conscious ability to say something that they know, because intellectually they know that they're biting his fingers. Just like you would know if you would not be able to go to sleep. You can't go to sleep because you're thinking about 1,000 things before you go to sleep, and when you go to sleep you can't sleep. But you know that you should do it, but you keep doing it. So that's conscience. But I'm talking about the subconscious ability to be able to understand what you have not done. And what you have not done is to create the vacuum in order to allow to think about the resources that you have, which I'll explain later. These are resources that I built within these conversations. Once the person understands what they have, values, principles, strength, consistency, persistency, all those things that the person